FAIRtax is coming, don't stand in the way. FAIRtax is coming across the USA. FAIRtax is coming, clean up this mess. We got to get rid of the IRS. Hey, hey! Hey, hey!
Hello, welcome once again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are
the FAIRtax Guys.
And we have been talking for the past several episodes, hey, what's wrong with the tax system? What would a better tax system look like in kind of generic terms? Now let's let the rubber meet the road here and get into the fair tax.
Yeah. We've talked about the VAT tax and the flat tax. All right. We've given you why we don't think those are good ideas. And now it's time to talk about, as Bob says, it's time to talk about the fair tax purely. Okay. The fair tax is a sales tax, a consumption tax. It will be included in the price of every new product and every service that you purchase across the country. And it can be collected by, mostly by computer systems. There are 45 states that have a sales tax right now. It can be collected by those folks. And it can be handled by the computers. Much less evasion. I mean, how do you evade a sales tax? It's nearly impossible. And since there will be no federal income tax, that means there will be no IRS to abuse us. So it's going to be
withholding to take money away from you before you even see it.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to talk about now.
Okay, let's have a little fun with this, rather than getting into the nuts and bolts of exactly how it's going to work.
Yep.
Let's focus more on how it's going to affect people and why they should like it.
Yeah, why should people be fans of the fair tax? Well, it just so happens we have this technique for doing this. Several years ago, in fact, I was looking, Bob, back at some of the old emails. This was almost 3 years ago that this came up. One of our fair tax volunteers in the Tampa area wrote an extensive email to our managing director and said, Mark, if we want to convince people that the fair tax is a good idea, don't bore them with the details. Don't go through all that, boring stuff about how it will work and so forth. Sell the sizzle, not the steak. And, our managing director said, hey, that's a good idea. He says, all right. So he sent an email out to all the leaders, said, cultivate as many of these. We started calling them sizzle points. All right. Short one-line comments about why the fair tax is a good idea. And as they were coming in and we were looking at them, I realized, hey, some of these kind of lend themselves to a Jeff Foxworthy style of presentation. And so I wrote to Bob and I said, there's no way that I am going to sound like Jeff Foxworthy. I'm just from the wrong part of the country. And if I tried to imitate it, then it would be painfully obvious that it was an imitation. All right. But Bob, however, is from the southern part of the country, and he does a pretty good Jeff Foxworthy imitation. So we are going to present the fair tax using You Might Be a FAIRtax Fan.
Okay, yeah, let's back up just a hair, though, for somebody who might not be familiar with Jeff Foxworthy. This is the guy that does the You Might Be a Redneck.
Yeah.
The redneck humor, and he can do that because he's one of them. You can't make fun of somebody else, but you can make fun of yourself.
Yeah, you're right. I just thought everybody knew who Jeff Foxworthy was.
Most of them were. Well, I want to get into what I think is my favorite Jeff Foxworthy Might Be a Redneck thing. I love the part that says, if the word NASCAR appears anywhere in your wedding vows, you might be a redneck. So I said, all right, you can do this. We can adapt this to make it work for the fair tax.
In fact, we even made a video of Bob doing this. But we're going to introduce the most important points of the fair tax in as entertaining a way as possible.
Well, this is at the top of the list, really. I don't know anybody. This extends across all political ideologies, across all party affiliations, that says if you'd like to have more money in your pocket by eliminating federal withholding and payroll taxes from your paycheck, you might be a FAIRtax fan.
Yeah. Now,
name me somebody who thinks more money in your pocket is a bad idea, because you've got a lot of people out there. This is serious. You've got a lot of people out there demagoguing the fair tax as this, radical right-wing nut job Tea Party idea. But then you say it'll put more money in your pocket, and they'll, I might like that.
Yeah, and they don't like the idea that it's a 23% tax. Well, if you don't like that, then reduce the size of government. But that's another story. That's another issue. But
yes, but for the record, the fair tax predates the Tea Party. It's not a Tea Party idea.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. It goes back over 20 years. Yeah. So, and we're talking about those three businessmen in Texas who came up with the original idea and did all the research on this. So it's well documented. But what Bob is talking about in this first one is the payroll tax. If we do away with an income tax, if you don't need to collect for an income tax, then you don't need a payroll tax. You don't need an income tax.
And you don't need money taken out of your paycheck, or if you're a retirement distribution, there are a lot of other places. If you win the lottery, Uncle Sam's going to grab a nice big chunk of that before you get it.
That's right.
All of that goes away with the fair tax, because withholding goes away, because you are no longer think out of the box here. You're no longer taxing income when you earn it. You're taxing wealth when you spend it.
Right. And it was really what the founders had in mind. But back then, 200 and something years ago, they couldn't do a national sales tax. There were no computers. I mean, how would they keep track of that? It was a monumental task. So nobody proposed it back then because it wasn't possible. It wasn't feasible. Now it's feasible. So you'll have more money in your pocket because there will be no withholding tax. There will be no income tax. Now, if you're on an insurance plan with your employer, there's union dues, something like that, of course, those things will still be taken out of your paycheck. That has nothing to do with funding the federal government. We are strictly talking about funding the federal government.
And those states that have an income tax, we would like to think, of course, you really can't tell because each state is going to handle this a bit differently. But if the fair tax becomes law at the federal level, I would imagine that many, maybe not all, but many states would scrap their income tax as well, and you'd no longer get state withholding either.
Yeah, that's right. There are states, where I used to live, there's sales tax and an income tax.
Fortunately, Florida here where we live doesn't do that. But.
No. And our economy's doing pretty nicely. I'm sure that's just coincidental. But anyways, yeah, you'll get more money in your pocket because you'll have more money in your paycheck. You'll get your whole paycheck. There won't be any federal withholding. Now, who wouldn't like that?
I don't know.
And the same. And Bob mentioned the retirement distribution. Okay, when I get my
Social Security benefits have tax held out of them.
Yeah, that's right. So Security will not be taxed because we won't be taxing income anymore. Your retirement distribution, for those of us that are getting retirement, that won't be taxed. There'll be no withholding there because we won't have the income tax anymore. And for those of you that are working a job and getting your W-2s and so forth, there won't be any federal tax taken out of your paycheck. So, and I remember setting up a booth, an information booth at one of the local events here, and there was a young woman who was working as a clown. And she was going around the event, keeping people cheery and so forth. And she came over to our booth and wanted to know if we did taxes. I mean, no, that's not what we're about. So my wife explained, she said, well, and apparently this young lady was just out of high school, and this was her first job, performing as a clown. And my wife said, when you got your paycheck, did you get your whole paycheck? And this poor girl had this pained look on her face. No, I didn't. They took a lot of money out of my paycheck. And it was truly painful for her. All right. That will not happen with the fair tax. All right. The fair tax will be collected when you go to the store and buy stuff. It'll be included in the price and yes, it will be included in the price of everything, including doctor's appointments and stuff like that. Everybody will pay the fair tax on everything they purchase, every new item they purchase. Okay?
Yeah, I was about to call you on that. Used items, no fair tax.
That's right. So
you're only going to tax it once when it's new, purchased for the first time.
So you think of a young, struggling family. Just a couple little kids at home. Maybe one parent or both parent are working. They're struggling to make ends meet and so forth. One, they're going to get their entire paycheck. Two, If they have to buy a car, they don't have to buy a new car and pay the fair tax on it. They can buy a used car and not pay which will not be subject to the fair tax, because we are not going to double dip under the fair tax. All right.
Let me go a little bit off here on a bit of a tangent. We're talking about eliminating the withholding and eliminating the payroll taxes.
That's right.
That currently support Social Security and Medicare. There are people out there, again, demagoguing the fair tax with less than totally truthful statements here, saying, oh, wait a minute, the fair tax gets rid of Social Security and Medicare. I don't think that's a good idea, but that's not what happens.
No, Bob and I sat in on a presentation by a guy who was trying to make that claim, and he almost didn't get out of there alive. Well, I
thought Elaine was going to choke him.
Because that's just not true. Yes, there will be no FICA, no payroll withholding.
The payroll taxes go away. The programs don't.
That's right.
Which means you've got to fund it some other way.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's written into the law, the legislation, which, by the way, is only 130-something pages long, double spaced. All right, it's not long, cumbersome legislation, and it's written in there, and I think it's right around 35%. Whatever is collected from the fair tax, the proceeds from the fair tax, as they go from the vendor to the state and from the state to the federal treasury, whatever is collected from the fair tax, about 35% of it must go to Social Security and Medicare. Must go. So that means whenever somebody makes a purchase, even if you're buying a jackknife someplace, small item, large item, whatever it is, the fair tax that's collected on the sale of that item, part of it is going to fund Social Security and Medicare. Now, right now, under the current system, who is funding Social Security and Medicare?
The people who are working for a paycheck.
Yeah. The people
only the people who are working for a paycheck. If you make your living, off investments and stuff like that, you do not support Social Security. So I'll tell you what, if somebody buys a Learjet, I can guarantee that somebody buying a Learjet is not paying Social Security and Medicare taxes because they're not working on an hourly job for a paycheck.
That's right. Yeah, they're making investments and they're getting dividends.
And those folks are going to start helping out.
Yeah, that's right. They will, the more you spend, the more you pay, the more you contribute. So every single purchase of a new product or service in the country under the fair tax will be supporting Social Security and Medicare. We don't have that now. We have people who are getting W-2s and people who are self-employed, and submitting the self-employment taxes. Those folks, all right? But so it's really going to be a much better system. And like we said, this first one that Bob brought up, or you might be a FAIRtax fan, more money in your pocket. Who doesn't like that?
Everybody likes that, regardless of your political affiliation, ideology, or whatever. More money is a good thing, and the fair tax is the only tax reform program that will do that. This flat tax doesn't do it, because the flat tax is still a tax on income. It will still be supported by withholding. You'll still have the payroll taxes, and again, the fair tax is the only tax reform proposal on the table that totally lets you bring home your entire paycheck minus whatever little voluntary deductions you may have.
Yeah, that's right. So,
all right. But I tell you what, something else withholding does. It just makes my blood boil. Spending priorities.
Oh, I know what's coming here.
If you are a family, especially a struggling family, that has to decide whether you want to buy bread or pay the light bill this month, and there are some people for whom it's that bad, you have to prioritize what you've got, and you can only go down as far as your money goes, right? What happens when the government steps in and says, I am your highest spending priority. You will pay me before you buy milk for the baby or before you buy bread for your family. That's not right.
It's immoral. I mean, let's get right down to it.
It makes me mad.
The accountant that my wife and I had when we had our small business, he called the tax code immoral. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is an immoral tax code.
So that young lady who was acting as a clown and saw all that money taken out of her paycheck realized that's her money that was spent for her, and she had no say in how it was spent.
Yeah,
it was just taken
Bob,
from her, and that's it.
I actually got grandchildren that are old enough, and they're getting the same reality, the same reality lesson too.
Okay.
And I was just talking with one of them yesterday, and he couldn't believe the amount that they took out of his paycheck.
Mm-hmm. So if you think feeding your family is a higher priority than feeding the government, you might be a FAIRtax fan.
That's right. That's right. It is a higher priority. Why? I mean, withholding started, I think the legislation was passed in 1943. Here we are, World War II.
What great historical event was going on at that time?
Yeah.
That was only 30 years. The income tax started in 1913.
Yeah.
30 years later, not only was it hitting everybody except the little, it started off as just going to hit a few people for a little bit. In less than a generation, it's hitting everybody, and they're taking your money from you before you even get it.
No, Bob is absolutely right. That's what they said in 1913. Don't worry about it. This will be a small tax on the most wealthy Americans. Don't worry about it. This tax started on people who earned the equivalent of in today's dollars of about $270,000. So everybody making less than that, don't worry about it. And a few people warned, hey, you don't want to do this, you don't want to do this. And Bob is absolutely right. 30 years later, they introduced withholding. There was actually some kind of withholding because of World War II, war bonds and things like that.
And then they promised that would go away at the end of the war, didn't they?
Yeah. And so then, and actually, this whole withholding idea was a way to fund Social Security.
Yeah,
which Franklin Roosevelt started. Never
underestimate a politician's lust for your money.
Yeah, that's right. So withholding started in 1945, and as Bob says, that's when the federal government decided that they were a higher priority than you taking your paycheck home and providing for your family.
And that's when the war was over.
Yeah, jeez. Yeah, that's right.
You'd think that would never have gotten off the ground.
So it's just, it's really upside down. It's really upside down. You and your family, remember the Declaration said that you are a sovereign individual. All right, we are the first country on the planet to make the individual sovereign, not a king or some ruling oligarchy or something. And that withholding just turns that all upside down. It says nope. The government is sovereign, and you will submit to the government.
The government is your highest spending priority, and you don't have any choice. They get it before you do.
And again, I don't want to sound like some wild-eyed non-government. No, I like some of the things the government does. Like I said, the interstate highway system was a great idea. It was a great idea. That's the type of thing that we expect the federal government to do. The military to defend us. We absolutely need that. So we're not talking about defunding the federal government. We're talking about getting the funding for the federal government on a more sane, a more realistic basis. And that's why we're so passionate about the fair tax.
Yes, but again, the ideal tax system, which is what we're talking about here, recognizes that your family ought to be a higher priority of the government. And again, fair tax is the only one that gets rid of the withholding, that lets you bring home your entire paycheck, feed your family before you feed the government. So if you think feeding your family is a higher priority, you may be a FAIRtax fan.
That's right. Yep. Now, we hope that we're cultivating some FAIRtax fans out there as we go along. What's next, Bob?
Well, I'll tell you what. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, trying to explain what the fair tax was about to him, and he looked me in the eye and he says, "Do you mean if you get this fair tax, I won't get my tax refund every year?" And I said, "Yeah, that's right. But do you realize that tax refund is your money? It's not the government giving you something back." Then I offered him a choice. How would you like to have, take your pick. You can get your tax refund every year, or you can get the full amount of your paycheck every month or every week, however often you get paid, plus a tax refund every month. How would you like that?
Ooh, wait a minute. Tax refund every month?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of a radical idea is that?
If you'd like to get a tax refund every month instead of maybe once a year, you might be a FAIRtax fan.
All right, what are we talking about here?
We're talking about something called the prebate.
Yep, that's the nickname. And the reason for the prebate is extremely important. It is what makes the FAIRtax fair, because some of you might be saying, wait a minute, you guys are talking about a sales tax. A sales tax is known to be regressive. It hurts the people at the lower income. So, yeah, if we put a sales tax across the country of 23%, then the people who are just getting by, it hurts them a lot more than, Bill Gates or Donald Trump or Mitt Romney or any of these wealthy people. Sure, it does. There's no question about it. A sales tax, especially a sales tax of 23%, admittedly, that's a high figure, but that's because it's a big government. A sales tax of 23% would hurt the poor, the people who are just getting by. And the Americans for Fair Taxation in the early days recognized this. Wait a minute, we got to do something about this, because the sales tax, yeah, it's simple and all that, but it's regressive. It's going to hurt the poor. Well, how can we solve that?
Does that mean you have to keep track of how much everybody spends and not start charging the fair tax until their spending exceeds a particular level? What a nightmare that would be.
Yeah, it certainly would be, and that's not something that they want to get into. We're trying to avoid nightmares. We're trying to get out of the nightmare that we're in now, not create another one.
Aha. Why don't you just collect it from everybody and then refund back to everybody the portion that's collected that they don't really owe?
Yeah, because, part of this big federal government is the Health and Human Services, and they publish poverty levels every year, usually by the end of January. And so they know, for instance, let's take a family of four. Right now, for 2016, they're saying a family of four. I need to get my prebate chart out, Bob. A family of four, they require about $32,000, right around $32,000 for the basic necessities of life. That's food, clothing, shelter, basic med care, and so on. All right. So they're and for a family of two, for a couple, it's less. For a family of six, it's more. It makes sense.
Yeah, the poverty level varies with your household size because it costs more to raise 5 kids than 2.
Yeah. So we're going to take a family of 4, and with the tax system, with the Health and Human Services, and we know exactly what they're going to need. So we're going to do a little calculating here. Get out the calculator, right. And $32,000.
These are round figures, but they're close.
Times 23%. They're going to spend each year about $7,300 and something on the fair tax. In other words, let's say the fair tax has passed. All right, we're in 2018. Let's say we pass it next year in 2017. It goes into effect in 2018. And people are going to the groceries and buying their food, clothing, shelter, and so on. And everything includes the fair tax. So this family of 4 that is just getting by on $32,000 a month means that
$32,000 a year.
Thank you. Sorry.
$32,000 a month. I could keep me in airplanes for a while. Go skydiving.
$32,000 a year. Sorry, misspoke. All right. So that means that over the course of the year, as they pay the 23% on everything, they're going to be spending about $7,300 and a little bit more.
Okay, we'll touch on this a bit later. The fair tax is inclusive, meaning that it's included in the price of everything you buy.
Yeah.
So if the price of everything you buy adds up to that $32,000, you will have paid that $7,000 and
about
change.
$7,300 and something.
That's how much you would have paid in fair tax that you don't owe. Because under the fair tax, you don't owe a dime until your spending exceeds that poverty level. But rather than try to keep track of how much everybody's spent, you collect it from everybody up front. It's kind of the left hand taketh away, the right hand gives it back. It's this prebate. They call it a prebate because it's a rebate given in advance. So you will pay that $7,300 plus at the register. That's how much you will get back in a prebate over the course of the year. So someone whose spending is right at the poverty level, their effective tax rate under the fair tax is 0 because everything that's collected from them at the register is rebated back to them with this prebate. And that's broken down, divided by 12. So you get your prebate check every month. So yes, you do get a tax refund every month. Not once a year, maybe, with a fair tax. And
a family of 4, your prebate check or your automatic deposit, whatever you want to call it, amounts to, under the current system, the 2016 figures, is $614. Now, so that means you're going to get your entire paycheck, and you're going to get a prebate of $614 a month, all right? And yes, the price of things is going to go up somewhat. It's not going to go up 23%. but it is going to go up
Yeah,
somewhat.
that's another thing somebody says, because they think that this 23% tax is going to be added to the price of everything you've got on top of all the income tax system. And that's a whole nother story when we talk about embedded taxes, how much of the price of the things that you buy are actually the cost of the income tax system being passed on down the line to you.
Yeah.
And the fair tax replaces all that, so prices will go up slightly. There are several economists that have looked at that, and they say, yeah, that'll go up some, but your purchasing power under the fair tax is going to be much greater because you don't have that withholding. You've got your entire paycheck to play with, plus you've got this prebate coming in every month, and everybody gets the prebate. It's not based on income. It's based on the poverty level for your household size. So you don't have to worry. No personal information has to be gathered in order to calculate how much your prebate is.
Yeah, the only thing you have to do, everybody pays the fair tax, everybody gets the prebate, all right? And the only thing you have to submit to the government is, this is our family, this is our address, these are the people that live in this household. Could be mom and dad and 2 kids. It could be mom and dad and 1 kid and Aunt Jane who can't take care of herself anymore, all right? Mm-hmm. There's 4 people in the household. The prebate will be $614, all right? If there's 2 people in the household, it's going to be less. If there's 6 people in the house, and so on. So it's strictly dependent on the number of people in the household. It has nothing to do with your income. So every household of 4, even if they make millions every year, they have income of millions, their prebate is the same of those people who are just getting by, because it only depends on the size of the household. That's it.
Yeah, but somebody with millions to spend is going to be spending a whole lot more than the poverty level, and once their spending rises above the poverty level, then and only then the fair tax starts coming out of their pocket, what this means is it's mathematically impossible for someone who spends a lot to pay a lower tax rate than someone who spends a little.
That's right. There's some of the fair tax leaders will say, hey, you have to talk about effective tax rates. Well, we're trying to keep it simple. But the truth is that if you put this on a curve, all right, a family of who's just getting by and getting the prebate and so forth, essentially their effective tax rate is going to be 0, because yes, they're going to be paying it on the stuff they purchase, and they're going to be reimbursed for it when they get the prebate. Why do we do that? Because nobody should have to pay taxes on what it costs to stay alive. Think about that. No one should have to pay taxes on what it costs to stay alive. No government is that important, all right?
And with the fair tax, that doesn't happen. So let's go back and review the 3 things that we've touched on this so far. That you might be a fair tax fan. All right, let me conjure up Jeff Foxworthy here. If you'd like more money in your pocket by eliminating federal withholding and payroll taxes from your paycheck or retirement distribution, you might be a fair tax fan. If you think feeding your family is a higher priority than feeding the government, you might be a fair tax fan. If you'd like to get a tax refund every month instead of maybe once a year, you might be a fair tax fan. And there's more to come. We'll cover these in a bit later. But Ron, real quick, how can folks get in touch with us?
All right, FAIRtaxGuys@gmail.com. All right, like I've said before, if you like what you're hearing, you have a question, you don't understand something, or you don't like what you're hearing, fine. We can take it. Send us an email, FAIRtaxGuys@gmail.com. Please go to bigsolution.org. All right, we need people to help us. We can't do we're not just doing this for our health, talking into the microphone here once a week. We need your help. There's no question about it. We absolutely need your help. And another way to learn about the fair tax is the monthly webinar, the 4th Thursday of every month, of almost every month, except November and December. But anyways, the 4th Thursday is a webinar which you attend at your computer in the comfort of your own home.
So if you want to know more about how the prebate works, you can ask an expert right there in real time. That's
right, because it's interactive. You can type in questions, or you can click the little raise your hand button, and they'll put you on live. So 4th Thursday, go to fairtax.org/webinar to register.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of FairTax Power Radio. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
Reminding you again, the fair tax is America's big solution, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Fair tax is coming. Don't stand in the